Clink, clink, clink. The sound is not the clash of a gladius against a shield, nor the thunderous roar of a legion on the march. It is the heavy rhythmic drop of gold coins hitting a cold marble table, echoing like a death knell in the silence of a private villa. In the flickering lamplight, a dark Numidian hand pushes a small mountain of wealth toward a figure draped in the white toga of a Roman senator. This was how the Roman Republic, the destroyer of Carthage and the master of the Mediterranean, was nearly brought to its knees in 111 BCE. It was not defeated by a superior army or a brilliant strategist, but by one man's wallet. Welcome back to World Chronicles. Today, we open the files on the Jugurthine War, a conflict that exposed the rotting heart of the Republic. As the Numidian prince Jugurtha rode out of the city gates, and leaving behind a capital he had successfully maneuvered through bribery and deceit, he looked back one last time at the sprawling grandeur of Rome. He did not see the glory of the Forum or the sacred fire of Vesta. He saw a marketplace. With a cynical sneer, he uttered the words that would stain the Republic's honor for generations. Urbem venalem et matur perituram, si emptorum invenerit. A city for sale and doomed to perish if it finds a buyer. The Senate, once the bastion of iron discipline and dignitas, had become a den of wolves where justice was auctioned to the highest bidder. Jugurtha believed he had purchased his survival, treating the masters of the world like common merchants. But he did not just buy politicians. He was about to lure a Roman army into a trap from which money could not save them. Jugurtha was never meant to be king. Born illegitimate, the son of a concubine, he was a man who should have remained in the shadows of the Numidian court. But he possessed a terrifying abundance of virtues, that raw masculine excellence the Romans so admired. Recognizing this dangerous talent, his uncle, King Micipsa, sent him to Spain to fight alongside the legions under Scipio Aemilianus at the siege of Numantia. It was there, amidst the dust of excavation works and the iron discipline of the camp, that Jugurtha received his true education. He did not just learn how to throw a pilum or command cavalry. He learned the internal mechanics of the Republic. He saw that behind the eagles and the marble speeches, every Roman commander had a price. He returned to Africa not as a savage auxiliary, but as a man who held the keys to the Roman psyche. When Micipsa finally died in 118 BCE, he left the kingdom divided between his two biological sons, Himpsal and Adherbal, and his adopted nephew Jugurtha. It was a fragile triumvirate built on sand. The inevitable collapse did not take years. It took days. Himpsal, arrogant and foolish, openly insulted Jugurtha's lineage, treating him as a servant rather than a co-ruler. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Jugurtha did not respond with a diplomatic protest. He responded with a purge. In the city of Thermida, the night air was suddenly choked with the heavy, acrid smell of smoke and the splintering sound of breaking doors. Jugurtha's soldiers, moving with the efficiency of the Roman maniples he had once commanded, stormed the residence. They hunted Hiempsal through the corridors like a frightened animal, severing his head as a brutal statement that the time for sharing power was over. Adherbal, the remaining brother, barely escaped the massacre, fleeing into the night to beg Rome for justice. In the hallowed halls of the Senate, where the fate of nations was usually decided by iron and dignitas, a different kind of war was being fought, one waged with silence and silver. When Adherbal stood before the Curia to beg for Roman justice, his words echoed off cold stone faces. He spoke of his father's loyalty to Rome and the treachery of his cousin. But while Adherbal pleaded with tears, Jugurtha's envoys were busy in the back rooms, speaking the universal language of corruption. The Senate's response was a masterclass in political theater. They did not send legions to punish the usurper. They sent a commission to mediate. The result was a partition of Numidia so blatantly lopsided it left observers stunned. Adherbal received the capital and the developed eastern cities, but Jugurtha was handed the fertile, populous, and warrior-rich western lands. The message was clear. In the Roman Republic of 116 BCE, justice had a price tag, and Jugurtha had paid in full. Emboldened by the Senate's apathy, Jugurtha did not wait. In 112 BCE, he invaded Adherbal's territory, bottling the prince up in the fortress city of Cirta. The siege was brutal. Inside the walls, the dusty, suffocating heat of the North African summer became a weapon as lethal as any arrow. Water ran dry, and the air grew thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and fear. Defending the walls alongside Adherbal's Numidians were hundreds of Italian merchants and Roman citizens, men who believed their citizenship was a shield that even a king would not dare to strike. They were wrong. When Adherbal finally surrendered, Jugurtha tortured him to death. Then, in a moment of ruthless calculation that would seal his own fate, Jugurtha turned his blades on the Italian defenders. He slaughtered the very merchants who had manned the walls, sending a shockwave of horror across the Mediterranean. The Senate tried to suppress the news to hide their bribes, but the tribune Gaius Memmius exposed the corruption in the forum, inciting the plebs to a fury that the elites could not ignore. Rome finally declared war, but the army they sent was not prepared for the nightmare waiting in the desert, or the corruption of the Senate floor soon seeped into the freezing mud of the battlefield. After a shameful peace treaty orchestrated by the consul Bestia, a peace bought, not won, command fell to Spurius Albinus, a man whose ambition far exceeded his competence. In 110 BCE, driven by a desperate hunger to seize Jugurtha's treasury, Spurius marched his legions against the fortress of Suthul in the dead of winter. It was a campaign doomed by geography and greed. Suthul stood atop a steep hill, surrounded by a plain that the relentless January rains had turned into a sucking quagmire. The Romans were not fighting a conventional war. They were wading through an environmental disaster. As the legionaries shivered in waterlogged trenches, cursing the mud that fouled their equipment, Jugurtha was busy deploying his most effective weapon, gold. And he did not need to storm the Roman palisade with engines of war. He simply purchased the men guarding it. The disaster struck under the cover of a violent storm. The heavy rhythmic drumming of rain on leather tents masked the soft thud of approaching Numidian footsteps. Suddenly, the darkness erupted into screaming chaos. But the fatal blow didn't come from the enemy out in the dark. In a shocking display of treachery, the third cohort of Ligurian auxiliaries and a squadron of Thracian cavalry, men paid to protect the eagles, turned their weapons against their own commanders. The gates were thrown open from the inside, and the Numidians poured in like a flood. Panic spread faster than the fire consuming the tents. Surrounded and broken, Spurius Albinus begged for terms. Jugurtha, savoring the irony, granted mercy at a terrible price. He ordered the construction of a crude archway made of 3 spears, the subjugum, or the yoke. One by one, the disarmed Roman soldiers were forced to pass beneath the spears, a ritual symbolizing their reduction from warriors to beasts of burden. They marched away from Suthul, not as conquerors, but as shamed cattle, leaving the honor of the Republic sinking into the Numidian mud. Rome had been humiliated. To wash away this stain, they needed a commander who could not be bought. In 109 BCE, the Senate sent Quintus Caecilius Metellus. He arrived in Africa not merely to command an army, but to rebuild one. What he found was not a legion, but a rabble, soldiers who had traded their pila for wineskins. The camp resembled a bustling marketplace, filled with merchants and the greasy scent of roasted meats. Metellus, a man of the old aristocracy who embodied strict severitas, wasted no time. He expelled the traders, banished the camp followers, and forbade the consumption of hot food. The soft life was over. In its place came the relentless rhythm of disciplina. From dawn until dusk, the air was filled with the thunder of marching boots and the grinding sound of the delabra hitting hard earth. Under the watchful eye of Metellus and his rough-hewn lieutenant, Gaius Marius, the men dug ditches only to fill them back up, marching tens of miles in full kit until they remembered that a Roman soldier's strength comes from deprivation, not comfort. Jugurtha, watching from his desert strongholds, immediately sensed the shift. When his envoys arrived with chests of gold, they were turned away. The era of the city for sale had ended. The Numidian king realized with a cold dread that he was no longer fighting corrupt politicians, but the awakened machinery of Rome. Metellus had forged the army back into a lethal weapon, but Jugurtha countered by luring them deep into the desert, to a river called the Muthul, where he prepared a kill zone. The Battle of the Muthul was a collision between two incompatible philosophies of war, fought within an environment that sought to kill them both. The Roman column descended from the mountain pass with a singular objective: the river. In the searing heat of the African interior, water was a tactical necessity, and Jugurtha knew this. He trapped them in the waterless void between the mountains and the river. The terrain was deceptive, a dusty plain choked with low scrub, offering perfect concealment for Numidian skirmishers. As the Romans marched through the haze, the trap snapped shut. From the brush, thousands of Numidian cavalry emerged, not in a solid line, but in swirling packs. They hurled javelins and retreated before the Roman heavy infantry could bring their gladi to bear. The dry soil, churned by thousands of hooves, erupted into a blinding cloud of dust. Visibility dropped to mere meters. Soldiers could not see their centurion's signals. They could only hear the whistling of javelins and the screams of men dying invisibly around them. The crisis deepened when Bomilcar, Jugurtha's lieutenant, launched the war elephants. These beasts were intended to be the hammer that shattered the Roman anvil. As the elephants thundered through the scrub, they threatened to trample the disorganized infantry. But here, the terrain that hindered the Romans also betrayed the beasts. The thick brush broke the momentum of the charge, and the Romans used the trees as cover to unleash volleys of heavy pila into the animals' unarmored flanks. The trumpeting of panicked elephants mixed with the roar of battle as the beasts turned back, crashing into their own Numidian infantry. Amidst this chaos, Gaius Marius, commanding the rearguard, proved decisive. He led his cohorts up the slopes to dislodge the Numidians holding the high ground, securing a vital anchor point. It was a victory of grit over brilliance, won by soldiers who refused to break. The Romans survived the Muthul, but they did not win the war. And in the command tent, a dangerous rivalry began to rot the Roman leadership from within. In the scorched camps of Numidia, patience was wearing thin. Gaius Marius saw his commander Metellus as a relic who feared losing his dignitas more than he desired victory. Marius was a new man, a novus homo, and he knew that to crush Jugurtha, Rome needed to stop fighting like a gentleman and start fighting like a butcher. He returned to Rome and, standing before the plebeians, promised what the Senate could not deliver: the head of Jugurtha. The mob roared, voting him consul for 107 BCE. But the Senate played a dangerous game, denying him the right to levy landowning citizens. they underestimated his ruthlessness. Marius turned his back on centuries of tradition and opened the rolls to the capitacensi, the head count, the landless poor who had nothing to offer Rome but their bodies. For the first time, men joined the legion not as a civic duty, but for a paycheck. In that moment, the loyalty of the army shifted irreversibly from the Senate and people of Rome to the general who fed them. Marius took these desperate men and forged them into a machine of iron and sweat. He stripped away the baggage trains, forcing every legionary to carry his own rations and tools. Under the blistering African sun, the soldiers groaned under packs weighing nearly 40 kilograms, earning them the nickname Marius's mules. Yet, this brutal efficiency allowed the legion to move with terrifying speed. They marched deep into the wilderness, striking strongholds the Numidians thought were protected by the desert itself. However, the desert has many eyes. As Marius pushed his exhausted men to the breaking point, the geopolitical landscape shifted. Jugurtha had found a new ally, his father-in-law, King Bacchus of Mauritania, and the war was about to expand into a conflict that no amount of marching could solve alone. By 105 BCE, the war in Numidia had devolved into a frustrating mirage. Marius had the legions, but Jugurtha possessed the desert. Every time the Roman columns advanced, the Numidian king melted into the dunes. Marius realized that iron alone could not conquer the sands. He needed a different kind of weapon. He turned to his quaestor, a debauched but brilliant patrician named Lucius Cornelius Sulla. What followed was not a military campaign, but a high-stakes gamble. Sulla rode deep into Mauritanian territory, effectively unarmed, to negotiate with King Bacchus. It was a mission of suicidal risk. Yet, Sulla rode with the supreme confidence of the old aristocracy, relying on his silver tongue to turn the father-in-law against the son-in-law. For days, the Mauritanian king wavered, torn between the sacred bond of family and the terrifying might of Rome. Sulla, cool and calculating, pressed the advantage. Destruction if he refused, alliance if he complied. Finally, the king made his choice. Bacchus summoned Jugurtha to a secret conference. Trusting his kin, Jugurtha arrived with only a few attendants. But as he entered the meeting place, the trap snapped shut. The silence of the desert night was broken by the rush of Mauritanian soldiers. Jugurtha's attendants were cut down instantly. The Numidian king, the man who had bought the Roman Senate and humiliated its legions, was seized not by the glory of battle, but by the cold grip of treachery. The lion of the desert was finally caged. But as the dust settled, a dangerous question arose in the Roman camp. Who truly deserved the glory? Was it Marius, the general who had bled for every mile? Or Sulla, the lieutenant whose cunning had captured the king? On January 1st, 104 BCE, the streets of Rome thunder not with the march of legions, but with the roar of the mob. Gaius Marius, now consul for the second time, rides the four-horse chariot of the triumphator, his face painted red to mimic the god Jupiter. The gold of Numidia, the very gold that had once bought senators, now flows into the public treasury. To the common people, Marius is the third founder of Rome. But as the sun sets on the Capitol, a far darker scene plays out beneath the stone of the Forum. Jugurtha, the strategist who had outwitted the Senate for years, is stripped of his royal robes. His jewelry is torn from his body with such violence that parts of his earlobes are ripped away. He is lowered into the Tullianum, the subterranean dungeon of Rome that smells of damp earth and ancient despair. As his bare feet touch the freezing stone floor, shivering in the absolute darkness, the fallen king utters his final chilling words. By Heracles, how cold is your bath? He is left there to starve, his body consumed by the darkness he once tried to buy. Yet, as Jugurtha's life ends in the cold, a fire has been lit that will burn the Republic to the ground. The victory does not bring peace. It brings a poisonous rivalry. Lucius Cornelius Sulla watches Marius take the glory with a cold, calculating jealousy. More dangerously, the war has fundamentally broken the Roman military structure. The soldiers who marched in the triumph are no longer landowners fighting for the Senate. They are the landless poor, loyal only to the general who pays them. Marius has forged a weapon that can be turned against the state itself. The Jugurthan War proved that Rome could be bought, but the coming years would prove that Rome could also be conquered from within. The gold of Numidia is gone, but the iron of the legions now belongs to ambitious men, and the first true civil war is already on the horizon.